Hey everybody, how are you all doing today? So not only am I 1 minute late, but just for today only, I'm a little loud. I'm always loud though. Yeah. How's this? Is this better? Do we like this volume or is it still a little bit lower? All right, I can't hear the difference. Well, a little bit. I'm still staying lower. Let me know when I'm there. It's still high. The slider is going. Does Pastor Jordan even use his voice? What's going on here? How are we doing?
Lower.
Still lower. How about now? So I go any lower, I'm just going to take the microphone off. All right. How is this? All right, good. Well, see, if I get it up nice and high, then I know you're going to listen to everything I have to say. So, that's tempting. So, not only am I starting now 2 minutes late, since I didn't do the audio check beforehand, but I do, for today only, I will need to be leaving early for class. If you weren't at early, today's Confirmation Sunday. And so we will, in a few minutes, have 3 very nervous teenagers with their very nervous families that I will go calm down. I will probably do other things, but the wonderful thing, one of the wonderful things I'm blessed with here at Rivercliff is that other people do a lot of this stuff for me. So I'm very blessed to have plenty of people to help me out, not only with confirmation, but a lot of other stuff as well. So, I know Pastor Jordan really sold the Bible studies that I was going to take in the month of May by saying I was going to teach you something, right? Something like that, good. So, what we're actually going to do for the month of May, and I got other stuff planned for later, which I will keep a secret for a little bit longer, but in the month of May, we're actually blessed here at Rivercliff to be celebrating a festival. Now, don't ask me what the difference between a feast and a festival is. I know there is one, but I can't tell you. I got a big blue book on my shelf that probably can. We're celebrating a festival or something like that every Sunday in May. And so, for our Bible studies, we're just going to talk about the day of the church. Now, typically, today, the sixth Sunday of the Easter season is not a festival day, but today we have confirmation. So we're going to talk about confirmation. Next week, again, is typically not, and is technically not a festival, but we will be remembering Ascension, which is always on a Thursday, and we're not going to be doing church on a Thursday. I know how you all are. I know how I am, so we'll do it on Sunday instead. After that, we have the Festival of Pentecost, and finally we'll be closing out with Holy Trinity Sunday. So I'm going to explain the Trinity to you in 45 minutes, and it will be just fine, right? Yeah. Today, however, we are going to be doing confirmation. I am not going to take you through a lesson of confirmation or anything like that. And in fact, I originally planned on kind of doing a history of confirmation, because it's not in the Bible, right? Kind of doing where does it come from, all of that kind of stuff. And for those of you who are really wishing that I was going to do that today, I don't know any of the answers to that, so I can't. But instead, what we're going to do today is I'm going to kind of run you through what confirmation here at Rivercliff looks like. Because as I'm just doing a quick glance around, I think in the room there are 3 people who have any real concept of what confirmation here at Rivercliff is. I'm one of them, and I'm going to call them out as much as I can today. Mr. Keith and Miss Judy assist me tremendously in the teaching of confirmation. And quite frankly, he's going to get a bonus shout out. The way I do confirmation is mostly, not entirely, but mostly Keith's fault. So normally in my Bible studies, I blame Bill, because all those things that I do in Bible studies are Bill's fault. But confirmation, not you, this one's Keith. Keith and I had a conversation like 2.5 years ago, and it ended up with me having to do a lot of work, but I think it was worthwhile. So, other than kind of just telling you what we do for confirmation, I want to also kind of give you a little bit of insight into, you can say, my philosophy of confirmation, why I do the things that I do, what I'm trying to accomplish, all of these sorts of things. But to start out, how many of you, I'm going to make you do the show of hands here today, right? Because the camera can't see any of you, just me, right? So by a show of hands, how many of you were confirmed around about 8th grade? All right. Oh, good. We got some good historic Lutherans in here. By the way, if you weren't, that's okay. If you came in as an adult, that's a whole other ball of wax that we're not going to get into today. How many of you had to, well, do an exam that was public? Yeah, so did I, right? How many of you had to, for your confirmation, you just sat down and the pastor or someone taught you the catechism? Right? This is, by and large, not how we do confirmation here at Rivercliff. You may have noticed that we have, since I've been here, we have had one public examination. And that was Evan Hammer and his class. So he got nailed. Although Matthew answered more questions than that whole confirmation class. But if you know the Hammer family, that won't surprise you. The reason we didn't have a public exam the next year is because of that little thing. I'm not sure if you remember it. COVID happened. And so that kind of threw everything into a tizzy. But then after that, I have not held a public examination. And this isn't really where I was planning on starting today, but I think it's as good a place as any. How many of you had your exam again? Public examination, you're answering questions up in front of a congregation, right? Keep your hand up if you enjoyed that experience. If you became a pastor, it doesn't count, right? By and large, Joe, you and I, and probably Jim over here too, we don't count for any of these, right? So, as COVID was coming to its conclusion and we were kind of getting things back to normal, I had been telling my students they weren't going to have a public examination because I didn't know when COVID was going to end. Can't do a public examination without, public, right? And so what I did is I began to kind of question. I asked myself, right? Did some self-examination. Why do we do public examination? Right? How many of you know why the public examination happens? Well, as I was considering it, the answer I came to, which is probably not technically the right answer, but the best reason I could find that we did public examination the way that we did was because we had to suffer through it, and so those kids darn well better suffer through it too, right? And to be fair, there is an element of communal suffering that builds bonds. And there is something to that. It's not completely kind of out there. But look, I told you I wasn't planning on this, so this is why I didn't even know. But this is why I'm starting here, right? One of the things I wanted to do with confirmation, ever since I came here, even before the conversation I had with Keith, was I wanted to be very, very intentional about confirmation, because there's a bit of an ugly truth that we're all staring in the face, and I mean, I felt it this morning while I was preaching, right? We say confirmation's a lifelong vow. You'd rather die than fall away from the faith, right? How many of you know someone that was in your confirmation class that's not a believer anymore? I know a lot. The vast majority of the people I was confirmed with, I don't believe are still in the faith, right? To me, that's a problem. So clearly something is going on, right? And it is not just confirmation. There's a lot of somethings that are going on. But I wanted to, as I went through confirmation here at Rivercliff, I wanted to be intentional about what I was doing so that confirmation could be, and I tell them this in the orientation, for me, confirmation at its core, or at least the instruction portion of confirmation, is to serve as the laying of a foundation, right? How many of you have lamented that so many people see confirmation as graduation, right? I've mentioned it tongue-in-cheek in the children's message, right? I've learned everything I need to learn, I'm good, I'm set, right? I mean, this is a common idea, right? I try and drill into the kids that is not the case, right? That there is quite a bit left to learn, left to teach. By the way, right, those of you who heard the children's message, you remember how many hours I estimated confirmation is of instruction between the two of them and I? 98 hours, which sounds like a lot, until you look at my Joel class and you realize that I've been talking for 4.5 hours in that class, and we have been flying through the book, right, Bill? We're just finished chapter 1, right? So there's more to learn, right? And so confirmation for me is setting a foundation for lifelong learning and trying to be intentional in a way with everything that I do that will set up the children for success, right? Like I said, I will not solve the problem of people leaving the faith with confirmation, right? But I want to do my part here. Go ahead, Steve.
By the way, after the children's message, all those kids came back and said, we're not going to confirmation.
Yeah, and guess what? I'll tell you what, they love it. I mean, I am fascinating and terribly entertaining, right? We have a good time in our classes, right? And usually our classes go as, the ones with me, go as long as they do because we just follow the rabbit trail, right? So one of the things, and this is a shoehorn into a different topic altogether that only a few of you are privy to, but that'll be all right. I encourage my confirmands to question me, right? I've actually had this conversation with a recent confirmand. I've told them, you ask me any question that you want, even if you think I don't have an answer to it. Even if you think it's not something you're supposed to ask in church. Why? Because I'm a firm believer that Christianity has the answers to the questions, right? Now, you may not like the answer. It may not be entirely satisfying, but we can manage questions, right? And so I encourage our confirmands, ask me anything you want. We will deal, this is something a permission I give them in confirmation class. I don't give all of you, right? I will deal with anything they want to talk about, right? Even if it's political, which, by the way, I'm not going to talk politics with any of you, especially in a setting like this, because that's not my role. With them, I will, right? Because I want them to understand that Christianity has the answers that the world is asking for, that the world says we don't have, right? So one of the ways in which we do this, right, and one of the ways in which I attempt to make confirmation engaging is, well, this is where the conversation with Keith came in. A couple of years ago, we were talking to each other, and confirmation is a 2-year program here at Rivercliff. And the way it was when I got here, and the way it was for a number of years after I got here, in fact, I wrote a whole curriculum based on this, is arbitrary year 1 was the Bible, and year 2 was catechism. Now, they might be flipped. We teach all the 7th and 8th graders together. And maybe I'm calling you out a little bit here, Keith, but I'm going to do it anyway and pray for forgiveness if you're offended later, right? Keith and I were talking, and he kind of said, Judy and I, so I'll throw Judy under the bus too, we love teaching the Bible year, right? Because the Bible's engaging. It's interesting. It's exciting. And, well, we got to get through the whole Bible in a year, and that's okay. We can manage it. But the catechism year, that one's a little bit difficult. It can get dry. It can get stale, right? How many of you, and it's okay, right? I won't mark you down. How many of you think that catechism instruction can get a little stale sometimes? Yeah. Especially when you're in middle school, how in the world does any of this matter, right, to my life? And I really took that to heart, right? Because it wasn't just the two of them that were having struggles teaching the catechism. It was the kids that were struggling to engage for an entire year. And so what we ended up doing is, one of my premises, which if you've been around long enough, you've heard me say this before, is that the catechism should be understood as glasses, right? So right now, I can see none of you. I know you're there. I see shapes in many bright colors, but I don't know who belongs to any of them. I have terrible vision. This is how most people read the Bible, right? They look at the Bible and they can read the words, right? I can see the colors. They don't know what's going on. What is happening? Well, the catechism is meant to be our glasses. It's the lens through which we can understand what the Bible is trying to teach us. And so, right after I finished writing a whole 2-year curriculum, I had a conversation with Keith, and I trashed the whole thing. Got rid of it. dumped the entire thing. So now, still a 2-year program, year 1 is Old Testament, and year 2 is New Testament. But every lesson that is taught in the Sunday school, which is what Keith and Judy do, which is part of confirmation, every lesson that is taught is tied with a section of the catechism. So, look at this. You see how clever this is? Not only do we get to spend 2 years in the Bible, but I get 2 years of catechism out of them without them even noticing. So, for example, when the lesson for the golden calf comes up, what do you think the catechism lesson that goes along with that is? First commandment. Well done. No other gods before me, right? It helps that God was chiseling those letters as it was happening, too, right? Not every lesson. We have more lessons than units of the catechism, but almost every lesson through the Old Testament and through the New Testament has a catechism application to it. To kind of teach the kids as we go, this is how to not only understand the Bible, but this is how to use your catechism, how to use the two in conjunction with each other. So, I'll pause. I've been talking for a little while. Any questions on anything so far?
Do they do memory work?
Do they do memory work? I have really struggled with this one. So I've done the same thing with memory work that I did with the exam, right? I asked the question, why am I making them do it, right? And the reason why you do memory work, as it turns out, is not because your parents had to suffer through it, so now you do too. Memory work, I have decided, is an extremely important thing, right? Get the Word of God inside of you. Bury it deep and let it enliven your life, right? Imprint onto your life. Same with the catechism, right? Now, that is my goal. Actually using that as a functional, finding a way to make that functionally happen has been more difficult. I have done it. It got dropped halfway through this year, not because of memory work, but because I dropped part of my instruction and replaced it with community service. So it used to be at the beginning of this year that one Sunday a month, just the kids would sit down with me for an hour, and we would talk specifically about catechism. And they would do their memory work based on that catechism. During those lessons, I'd give them tests. I found that while this is an extremely valuable thing, I could not hold the kids' attention, which is not their fault, right? They've been in church all day. They've gone to Sunday school. They've gone to church. It's Sunday. They're either hyper or exhausted, one of the two. And keeping them engaged and focused for an hour was proving to be difficult to the point where it was mostly a waste of time. So instead, and we did this starting in January, I dropped that class. I told them, much to their disappointment and mourning, that they weren't going to have to sit down alone with me on a Sunday afternoon for an hour. Instead, and it's something I've wanted to add into confirmation, we're going to be the hands and feet of Jesus. We're going to work out what it means to be the body of Christ and live in this world. So we've added a community service. So in January, they did something that they loved doing, and we helped serve with Lutheran Braille workers. In February, they didn't finish, but they helped clean up the playground around back. By the way, we have a playground back there. If you do, it's slightly less overgrown and overrun than it used to be because of the confirmands, right? I dragged them back there, and we got to work, right? Got our hands dirty. March was Easter, so I had them help out with the Easter breakfast. Part of this also came on a little bit of an off-the-cuff decision. And then in April, we were at the CAC. So that the kids, a few of you were there at the CAC with the kids, helping pack. We packed a lot of cans, right? We got to write on lots of cans of vegetables and tuna and things like that. And did you know a crate of tuna is extremely heavy? Because I do now, right? So while I've dropped memory work for the time being, although, like I said, I always want to find a way to get it back in, I added community service instead. Yes?
Well, instead of one or the other, I didn't volunteer. I was working, and we had the children recite to their parents, because quite actually the church.
That's one of the things I've considered doing.
And the parents had to sign off on particular Bible passages that were prescribed.
Yeah.
And then they handed in.
That is one of the ways I've considered adding memory work back into this, because like I said, part of the struggle is the venue for recitation. I'm doing other things the rest of the time, so I have considered that. This is a great segue into kind of the structure of confirmation and who the teachers are, right? So, who wants to be bold and raise their hand and tell me who teaches confirmation here at Rivercliff?
We thought you did.
You thought I did. Wonderful. That's actually the right answer. It's not me.
Parents.
It's the parents. I make this extremely clear to them. I am not responsible for the Christian education of their children. Right? Have you looked at the headings of every section of the catechism? As the pastor at their congregation shall teach the children. No. As the head of household. Right? Now, I'm a resource for the parents. Right, so in that sense, I do teach confirmation. But who is ultimately responsible for the Christian education of the child? It's not me. It's the parents. Also assisting me and assisting the parents as servants in this role is also Keith and Judy. So we have what I use it as a 3-tier confirmation system. The first tier is parents to kids. By the way, the 2-hour class I teach on one Sunday a month, the parents are attendance for parents is mandatory for that one. We've had, I think, very small exceptions to that where there's been some reason why a parent can't be there, but a parent is in the room during instruction for most of what I teach. So the parents are teachers. The next tier is the 78 Sunday school. Sunday school attendance is required, although that one sometimes is more difficult than others. But at least in theory, it's required. They are there with Keith and Judy every week going through, this year it was the Old Testament, next year it'll be the New Testament. And then I do instruction as well. This is, by the way, how we get up to almost 50 hours a year of instruction with the kids. All of it's intentional. I mean, let's see, they read through the book of Obadiah this year, right? I make them read a book of the Bible in Sunday school. We do Obadiah and Philemon. Who knows why we picked those two books in the Old and New Testament? Joe knows. They're one chapter long. They're short, so you can get through them in one lesson. Additionally, with that, my lessons are focused each year. The Old Testament is the year. That's the year. I have my notes in front of me. I'm all over the place. So the Old Testament year, that is the year of the church. No, that's the year of, I taught it this year. But I didn't teach the church. We did the church. Anyway, I'm confusing myself now. One year is the year of the church, and the other year is the year of God. So in the year of God, we talk about, let's see, I'll just actually get my lessons. So the lessons that I teach, these are my 2-hour sessions. Law and Gospel, Trinity and Christology, which I get this close to using the phrase, well, I do use the phrase, the non-reciprocity of the Genus Majastaticum, but I don't tell them what it is. Creation and man, justification, faith in the Word, the sacraments, and sanctification. By the way, Pastor Jordan teaches that one. We have one lesson a year that I make Pastor Jordan teach so that the kids know who he is, right? The other year is the year of the church. We do Law and Gospel again. They get a lesson both years on the Law and Gospel. We do the liturgy, witness and work of the church, vocation, end times, the sacraments again, and stewardship. And again, that's the one that Pastor Jordan teaches. So the idea is that catechism is done at the home, still working on organizing that out. Catechism specifically. The Bible with catechetical connections is done in Sunday school, and then kind of large picture theology stuff I do with the kids. In addition to this, we're encouraging prayer life. We're encouraging service in the community now, and we're starting on figuring out ways to directly include stewardship into this, as well as assisting in the church. By the way, one of our confirmands, I'm going to call her out specifically, Rhiannon, has already signed up and done and will continue to be one of our AV people. I told them they were adults in the church, and so I now expected them to be serving in some capacity in the congregation. And Rhiannon specifically has picked that one up. I'm very proud of her. I keep trying every year to force them into doing altar guild stuff, but for various non-important reasons that hasn't quite happened just yet. Good, so we'll pause here for a moment for more questions.
What questions do you want?
Any question you've got about this, all right? So this is usually how, when I ask for questions in all of my classes, right, be it the confirmation classes, the Wednesday evening classes, I very rarely get large, copious amounts of questions. I took a couple years in undergrad studying education, and they said pause frequently for questions because, if you have a question and your student's afraid to ask and you wait an hour and a half to say, you got a question? They won't remember what they wanted to ask you, right? Yes, go ahead, Mark.
I'm just going to raise a question then. Do you give them an outline for their public witness when they have their essay that they read, or how does that?
I mean, I give them an assignment sheet. So one of the assignments, and Barb, we are just on track for segues here, because guess where I was going next was assignments. This is wonderful. So one of the assignments, the one that you all get to see, is their confirmation paper. This is done by the 8th graders. It is to be one page, although that one page can vary in length tremendously, which is fine, right? That's not the point. It's one page. The prompt is, what does my confirmation verse mean to me? So we here at Rivercliff, I let the kids pick their confirmation verse. I know that a lot of churches have the tradition that the pastor picks the confirmation verse. The reason I have the kids pick the confirmation verse, and maybe this is me not being quite as critical in my thought as I could be, I picked my confirmation verse, and it was very meaningful to me to do that. It was a very personal experience for me. So I let them do that as well. But the prompt is, what does my confirmation verse mean to me? And they are to write a one-page paper on what their confirmation verse means to me. Why did they pick it? Right? Explain yourself, right? Every year I have the question, because they have to memorize their confirmation verse and speak them publicly on confirmation day, which, by the way, during the very, very quiet pause after I say their name and the citation of their verse, that's when they are going, and they're reciting it to me. So I will have heard it. Whether or not any of you can hear them reciting their confirmation verse, I don't know. Every year I get the question, can my confirmation verse be Jesus wept? Right? Do you know what my answer is? Absolutely. Right? Yes, your confirmation verse can be Jesus wept. You got to write a paper for me, and I have to approve that paper. And I will have told them at this point, if it starts getting serious, that there is a law and a gospel application to Jesus weeping. And not only do they need to tell me what it means, but if you're doing a 2-word verse, you need to explain the law and the gospel of Jesus weeping to me. And no one take me up on it. By the way, we do an exam. We'll talk about this in a little bit. And I've also given them an out. Right? I will ask them 0 questions if they recite the Athanasian Creed to me from memory. And I will be honest, I am surprised Rhiannon didn't do it. She was really thinking about it, and in fact, I very seriously considered rescinding my offer because I know she can do it too. And it's not meant to be a real offer, right? One of the assignments is the paper. By the way, I read those before they read them to you. Those are approved before they go to the congregation, right? That being said, in all the years I've been doing this, there's only been 1 or 2 papers where I've sent back for edits. And usually that's because their one page looks more like a quarter page, and they don't talk about Jesus very much. So I say, let's add a little bit. But by and large, I think a lot of you would be impressed. Both of our confirmants, if you heard Rhiannon or Claire reading their paper, both of them had no notes. They sent it to me. I said, perfect. Don't change a thing, right? Except, and I'll call her out because she's been giving me a hard time about this, except for Claire. Claire got a note on hers because of a conversation we had at the retreat, which is the book of the Bible is called Revelation with no S, right? This is a ridiculous pet peeve of mine. She said Revelations at the confirmation retreat. I very gently and lovingly corrected her, and that, of course, meant that at no point was she ever going to say Revelation. So if you watch the live stream, well, it's hard to see on the live stream, you will see right before she says, my confirmation verse is, eye contact with me in the narthex, Revelations 21. So I'm going to call her out. And she was so excited to do it again today, but I say the name of the book. So anyway, that was the only note I had, and she didn't listen to me anyway. So that's one of the assignments. How many of you, when you were confirmed or in confirmation, had to do some form of a sermon outline? Right? I did. Don't tell any of the confirmands. I don't think I did all of them. I think I didn't turn all the ones I was supposed to in. I'm not sure, but I'm a pastor now, so I think I got a pass. I make them do sermon reviews. The 7th graders have 4 sermon reviews to do, and the 8th graders have 5. They get 1 added, and it's a required, specific sermon required, and it's the Maundy Thursday sermon. And they get an extra question, and it has to do with the whole service, not just the sermon, because, Maundy Thursday has something to do with communion, right? But here's what I tell them. I say, if any of you turn in an outline of a sermon, it does not count. I don't care. I don't want an outline of a sermon. I'm very confident that if they desired to, or if any of you desired to, you could outline a sermon. Don't care. Not interested in that. Because, and again, this is intentional, I don't care about their ability to do an outline. The purpose of the sermon review is to teach them and to begin to build the ability to discern a good sermon from a bad sermon. So here's the question. Anyone who has never preached a sermon is allowed to answer this. What makes a good sermon good and a bad sermon bad?
Blank.
It is not the length, although, well done. Without a beat. That was good. It is not the length. What? Syntax. It's not syntax either. In fact, it very much is not. Right? One of the things I make sure to drill into them is a good sermon is not one that's entertaining. Right? Now, it may be entertaining, and that might be a good thing, but that's not what makes a good sermon. So what makes a good sermon? Oh, yes, good Lutherans. Right? Law and gospel. So I have them answer 3 questions. Actually 4, sorry. Their sermon reviews are 4 questions long. The first is, what is the text that this pastor is preaching from? And I always remind them that that means it's easier for them to do my sermon reviews than Pastor Jordan's. You all know why? Because I start my sermon with, the text for this sermon is, right? Pastor Jordan doesn't always do that. In fact, he rarely does. And he has a habit of bouncing between the texts, which is fine. He's reading from a text, or he's preaching off of a text. So the sermon must be from a text. There has to be Bible in the sermon, otherwise automatic bad sermon. Second, there needs to be law, and so they are to give me 1 example of law in the sermon. And the third question is that there must be gospel, so they must give me 1 example of gospel from the sermon. And the fourth is, how does this sermon apply to my life? So they need to give me 1 application to their life from the sermon. Now, I've never had a confirmand take me up on this, but I tell them that they do not need to do the sermon reviews here. They always do. They always turn in either Pastor Jordan or I. So I think I got one from a Pastor Leckie sermon a while back, but it was still here. Because this is not the litmus test for a good sermon at Rivercliff only. This is at all congregations. This is what I'm trying to teach them, right? Because, and maybe you disagree with me on this one, but in the end, I am less concerned if these kids are LCMS Lutherans for the rest of their life. I prefer it. I'm an LCMS pastor for a reason. I want them in the faith for the rest of their life. That's my goal here, right? And so I want them to be able to take this discernment in sermons to any congregation they go. And to be able to determine, is this preacher preaching well or not, right? Not is he entertaining, not is this make me feel good. Is there law and gospel in this sermon, right? And so, by the way, I printed out sermon reviews, many of them. If any of you would like to practice, I will leave these out for you. They have your questions. The text preach, the law, the gospel, and the application of my life. Feel free to turn these into me. By the way, I tell the kids that they do, Pastor Jordan and I, well, mostly me, a service in turning these in. Because every once in a while, I'll have more than one confirmand turn in a sermon review on the same one of my sermons. And they don't have a clue what I talked about. But they both think I talked about something different, and it's the same different thing. What might that tell me? That I didn't do a good job that day, right? That I didn't make my point clear. So it is helpful to me. I encourage you, give this a shot. See what it's like to be a confirmand. Like I said, they have to be 4 in a year. And I will say this. I've had a couple of adults do these for me before, and the amount of times adults will put a law statement in the gospel column is striking. It's a problem that the kids don't tend to have. They have other foibles that are very common to what they are doing. Another thing is I have yet to have an adult, well, with one exception, because I told her she wasn't allowed to turn one in without doing it this way. The application to my life, I've never had an adult without me specifically telling them, put a gospel application down. It is always, I will be better, with explanation, every time. And that's very interesting to me. Anyway, so if you want to give it a try, here they are. I encourage you to turn them into me. It'll be so much fun. It's a good time. I'm nice, I promise.
Do we have to sign them?
Name, date. I do tell the kids that if they do a sermon review that's not here, if at all possible, I'd like links to recordings. I mean, I'm not going to require it because not everyone does it. And I've told them this. I said, if you want me to have to do more work, do a sermon review to a sermon that's recorded in a different congregation, because I will watch it. And make sure, all right, I got to grade it somehow, right? They just probably doing whatever they want. None of them have done that yet, right? That's what I would have done, is I would have been like, oh, I was over at, Wrath of God Lutheran Church in North Dakota the other day. And, I mean, easy, right? None of them have done it yet. They're not clever enough yet. Go ahead, Barb.
Is it possible that you include an evangelism component in confirmation?
We haven't yet. So, confirmation with me is a work in progress from a curriculum standpoint. I have, and it's almost comical at this point, because in my orientation PowerPoint, there's a slide for outreach. And my note for the outreach slide in orientation is, I'm still trying to figure out how to include this. So, and I haven't gotten it just yet in a way that I think is effective, although I think the community service is a starting point. Because one of the things I don't want to do is, like I said, I'm trying to be extremely intentional about how I'm doing this. I also don't want to give assignments that are not unrealistic, but forced, perhaps, right? I'm not saying you're recommending this, right? But go tell 2 people about Jesus, like that's not effective.
I'm talking about instructing them in how we can do evangelism. In other words, these kids are going off into a high school situation, and it's a secular world, and it is intense.
Yes.
And they have to know how to hold their ground. They have to know that once they leave the family at breakfast or after breakfast, that they can speak God's truth, and how do they do it?
I think
without getting in trouble.
I can appreciate that. I think one of the ways, at least that I conceptualize doing that kind of thing is that's what the instruction is for. That's what me teaching them the Trinity, Christology, right? Because you can't give answers if you have never heard the answers, right? And so to give this, because what it sounds to me that you were describing, Barb, is less outreach and more apologetics.
That's basically
yeah.
it. But if they have the apologetics, they can speak the
right.
truth. They've got the wherewithal.
Right. Now, I will say I used to have a dedicated apologetic section with the kids. And what I found is, and maybe it's a me thing, but they're not ready quite for it.
You can give them examples when you're teaching.
This
is how I would do such and such, and you'd be surprised how that carries.
No, I can. Well, I mean, we hit practical examples all the time. I know Keith and Judy do this kind of thing regularly as well. Oh yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think the way we tend to think of apologetics specifically is like a defense for the faith sort of thing. From a behavioral cognitive standpoint, this is Piaget for our teachers, they're still in concrete operational, and to really do apologetics, you need to be in abstract operational, to be able to effectively manage it. So I've done apologetics to high schoolers a couple of times. I haven't called it that. I've done other things, because they're at more of an abstract operational standpoint, and they're kind of more prepared and equipped from a educational standpoint to have effective use of apologetic instruction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
By the way, that last bit, if you understood nothing that I said, it's teacher, philosophy, education kind of stuff. Go ahead.
Doesn't concrete operational stop at like 8?
Concrete operational never stops.
I mean,
but
the propensity to use it as the default.
right, I think it tends to go into, maybe Barb, you can help me out with this.
Not really, because I haven't looked at Piaget.
Okay, it continues on. You don't get into true abstract thinking until late high school.
Yes.
Which is why high schoolers hate history, because they don't do any abstract. Sorry, this is a soapbox. Right, that's when you can start getting into true abstract thought, which is kind of what you need for good apologetics. There might be a stage in between the two that I've forgotten about. Let's see. Any other questions? This is good stuff. So like I said, because I'm coming to the point in which I have told the confirmands I will go join them, so we'll begin to wrap things up. Look at that. I'm doing a class that's less than an hour, like less than 45 minutes. It's shocking, even to me. One of my overarching goals for confirmation, as I've said, is the establishment of a foundation of lifelong learning, right? I long ago gave up the goal of teaching the kids everything they need to know. I can't do it, right? It's not possible. Even if I had them 24 hours a day regularly, there's too much, right? And there's things that they're not ready for. There's things in this world that they haven't encountered before. And so it's impossible to teach certain things without certain life experiences. I will say this as kind of example of this, and I'm giving exactly no details on purpose here, and you'll understand why in a second. During our lock-in, I forced the kids to go through individual confession and absolution. So we do a whole big devotion. It changes each year. This next fall, I'm going to burn my fingers again because I light paper on fire. It's really exciting. Don't tell Doug, but I am doing it in the sanctuary. I get flashbacks. It's really fun. Anyway, but it hurts. I found I've been doing this for years and years and years, so don't guess on anyone or anything like that. But I have found in hearing what kids think are their sins to be fascinating. Because sometimes they come up to me and say, this is the thing that I have a tremendous amount of guilt over. And my initial reaction is, why? That's not a sin. That's just like, not even approaching a sin. That's life, right? And I say this, like I said, no details, no kids, anything like that. Some of them, by the way, I give them the option. I say, do you want to talk about it? About half say no, about half say yes. I do it for the mentors there as well. Have yet to have a mentor actually say anything to me. The kids will, though. Again, interesting insights. But I give this example because in a lot of ways these kids, and I don't think it's a culture thing, right? A lot of ways these kids aren't quite ready to conceptualize and internalize introspection into their own sinfulness. I mean, they know they're sinners. They know certain things that they do are bad. They're not supposed to do them. They're sinful, right? But to truly sit down, look at yourself, and say, for these things, I am deeply sorry, right? A lot of them aren't there yet. They need more life experience. They need to interact with other people more. They need to be in church a little bit longer with more concept of what's going on. That's part of what the law section of these sermon reviews are for, is to kind of start to do some introspection. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these kids, I think, are still struggling with understanding what is and isn't sin, even. Which we adults, I think, have probably not as good a grasp as we think we do, right? But we have a decent grasp at that in our lives, which we are sorry for. Kids have it too, but it is different than it is for adults, at least in my experience. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for the showing of the Joshua tape today.
Oh, if you haven't been to church yet, get ready for a treat.
That was stunning.
What a wonderful way to conclude here. So we have 3 confirmands this year: Rhiannon Olson, Claire Farmer, and Joshua Kroll. For those of you who know Joshua Kroll, you might know that confirmation was a bit of a challenge. I can still remember sitting at Tin Lizzie's with David Kroll, and David informing me, if you know him, that Joshua was going to be going through regular instruction, just like all of the other kids. And I remember hedging a lot of the things I said to him, saying, "We'll give it a try." And I didn't think it was going to work. This is my confession. I didn't think it would. I have been blown away being Joshua's teacher. I think there was one class, and it was the first one he was there for, so a brand new experience for someone with autism, right? There was only one class we ever had any consideration that this probably won't work. And then after that, he's been a wonderful joy to have in the classes. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, Joshua confesses out loud the Apostles' Creed from memory. It's in there. By the way, I didn't talk about the examination. I do examine the kids, by the way. I just don't do it publicly. And this might be worse. I make them sit down in my office alone, one-on-one with me. And I ask them questions. The reasons why I do this are, one, kids can be shy around adults, especially adults they don't know super well, like the elders, which, they kind of know the elders, but to have Steve, this tremendously intimidating man, they're watching them as they, right? So I get more of a one-on-one interaction with the kids. I can ask follow-up questions. I have had, God bless this child, I was asking one of the easy introductions about who God is, right? I'm looking for Father, Son, Holy Spirit. This person said Father and Son, and then stopped talking. And I said, okay, anything else? Nope. About a minute later, I said, well, so what's going on with the Holy Spirit? What's that all about? And they said, I don't know. I said, well, is the Holy Spirit God? They said, don't think so. We circled back around and we figured it out, right? But one, imagine, how many of you, either yourself or you had someone in your class that said something foolish because they were nervous?
Yeah.
This kid, by the way, I also used their sermon review as my paragon of a perfect sermon review. I handed it out. I said, I have had adults do this. I've never seen a better sermon review than this one. And then the next week, they told me the Holy Spirit wasn't God. It's like, they were nervous. Scared, right? It was the beginning of the exam. They're sitting in a room alone with their pastor while I'm grilling them, and their parents are outside the glass doors watching it, right? Now there's no public shame with that, right? Which, notice I haven't even used gendered terms, so good luck guessing. But it allows me to kind of follow up on questions. It allows me to have a personal conversation with the kids. They all, at the end of the exam, before I tell them they passed, I talk to them one-on-one about them. Not, oh, kids your days, oh, the world nowadays. No, it's you and me, right? And so I can have far more personal and I think impactful conversations. I can remember what I have talked about with confirmands for a couple of years now in some of these conversations. I hope they can too. They're in middle school, so I won't blame them if they've forgotten. I don't remember anything from when I was a middle schooler. But it allows me to kind of have more of a personal connection there. And we can do it further away from confirmation, so that if there is something we actually need to work on, that we have time to do it before families in town and all of that. So that's the exam. I made Joshua do an exam as well. If any of you want it, I still have it. I asked him one question for each part of the catechism, and he had pictures to choose from. And he only got one of them wrong at first, and that's because there was a picture of money, and I think he got excited about it. Everything else, I didn't even finish asking the question, and he got him right. And we said, well, are you sure about that one? And right away. He gets it. He really does. If any of you are curious or questioning that, Joshua has an extremely deep faith. It presents differently than everyone else in this room. That being said, how many of you present your faith the exact same way as anyone else in this room, right? I mean, Joe and I are pretty close. That's just because we're both terrible nerds. He's more sci-fi, I'm more fantasy, right? That's about it, right? He has a deep faith. I think he has a much deeper understanding than any of us can truly know. I told the elders this, right? Because I do talk to the elders to approve our confirmands before, and I basically said, if any of you have any doubts about Joshua, we're going to have a talk. And I'm very happy to explain why exactly I think Joshua is not only ready to be confirmed, but ready to receive communion as well. And quite frankly, I think in a lot of ways he's more ready than most of us, right? He does a lot better job of just believing what God says to him than I do, that's for sure. So thank you. If you want it early, don't worry. We have it on the late service as well. It's a little hard to hear just because it was a cell phone recording, and Joshua's not loud and he doesn't enunciate very well. But you listen for the Apostles' Creed. It's there, and you can hear it. What a blessing it is. All right, I have -6 minutes for questions. So anyone else with a question? Wonderful. All right, I'm going to go over to the confirmands. If you wouldn't mind setting or putting the tables back up. If any of you want a sermon review, I know it's funny, but I really encourage you to give it a shot. Live the life of a middle schooler, just for a moment, right? So thank you all. We'll be back next week for the Ascension.